Hello, and welcome to Sleepy Science by Nem Vita. Whether you're listening at the end of a long day or simply letting your thoughts slow down, this is a place where curiosity unfolds gently. There's nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember, and nothing you need to focus on. If you find your attention drifting, that's perfectly fine. Let the words become a soft background, and let your body settle into rest. Allow your breathing to soften, slow down, and become quiet, steady, and easy. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're going to spend time with something that grows quietly all around us. Something that does not hurry, does not compete, and does not announce itself. Flowers, not as decoration, not as symbols, but as living systems that have been unfolding in the same calm way for a very long time. Long before gardens existed, flowers were already forming. Long before they were named, collected, or given meaning, they were opening and closing according to simple conditions: light, water, temperature, and time. A flower does not begin as something impressive. It begins small, sealed inside a seed, resting in darkness, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, sometimes longer than a single season. During that time, nothing appears to be happening, and yet everything required for growth is already present. This kind of waiting is not emptiness, it is stability. When conditions become gentle enough, not perfect, just consistent, the seed begins to change. There is no sudden movement, no clear starting point, only a gradual shift from stillness into quiet activity. The ground around the seed does not change much. The soil remains dark, cool, and supportive. It does not rush growth forward. It simply holds space for it. Below the surface, roots begin to form slowly. They do not search aggressively. They extend carefully, responding to pressure, moisture, and balance rather than intention. Above the ground, nothing looks different yet. And that invisibility is part of the process. Most of life's important work happens where it cannot be seen, and it does not require observation to continue. Water moves gently through the soil, not all at once, but in small, patient paths. Light returns each day without urgency, touching leaves and stems that will form later. Growth follows repetition, not force. And just like these early stages of a plant, you are not required to do anything here. You don't need to progress. You don't need to follow along. You're allowed to rest while the story continues on its own. In the early stages of growth, it helps to slow the way we think about what a flower actually is. A flower is not a separate object added onto a plant. It is not an ornament that appears at the end of growth. It is simply another phase of the same living system, shaped by the same quiet rules. Roots, stems, leaves, and flowers are all expressions of one continuous process. Nothing suddenly changes direction. Nothing breaks from the pattern that came before. When a plant begins forming a flower, it does not make a decision. There is no moment of intention. The transition happens gradually, guided by steady conditions that have been building for some time. Light returns each day. Water continues to move upward. Temperature shifts soften and stabilize. And over time, internal structures begin to reorganize. This reorganization is slow enough to be invisible. Cells divide at a measured pace. Tissues form without sound or signal. If you were watching closely, you would not see a clear beginning. This is why flowers often feel sudden, even though they are not. By the time something becomes visible, most of the work has already been done. A flower is built from simple materials: water drawn from the soil, minerals dissolved and carried upward, air and light interacting gently at the surface of leaves. Nothing extra is added. Nothing is wasted. The same elements are reused again and again, reshaped quietly over time. The form of a flower can feel intentional, as if it were designed, but its shape emerges naturally from function. Petals spread in ways that interact smoothly with light and air. Color appears because certain structures absorb some wavelengths and reflect others. There is no urgency in this process, no deadline to reach, no moment that demands completion. If your attention drifts here, that is expected. This is not information meant to be held tightly. It is meant to move slowly, like the growth it describes. Flowers are temporary, but they are not fragile. They open when conditions allow. They remain for a time, and they fade without resistance. That fading is not a failure of the system. It is part of its balance. As a flower changes, energy is redirected. Seeds begin to form quietly. Materials are reclaimed and reused. Nothing simply disappears. This entire cycle has repeated for longer than human memory. Long before flowers were named or noticed, they were opening and closing in the same calm way. And they continue whether anyone is watching or not. You don't need to understand every detail of this. You don't need to remember any of it. Like the plant itself, you are allowed to remain in a steady state, supported, unhurried, letting the process continue without effort. Seeds are one of the most patient forms of life on Earth. They are not waiting in the way people wait, with expectation or restlessness. They are simply stable, holding a complete system in a compact form, often for long periods of time, without changing in any visible way. A seed contains everything a plant needs to begin, not as instructions that must be followed, and not as a plan that needs to be executed, but as a quiet arrangement of structures, stored energy, and protective layers. It exists in a state that is neither active nor inactive, but balanced. For weeks, months, and sometimes years, a seed can remain unchanged. Cold does not disturb it. Darkness does not confuse it. Dry conditions do not force it to act. This ability to remain still is not a weakness. It is one of the most reliable survival strategies in nature. Inside the seed, chemical processes are slowed to a minimum. Energy is conserved carefully. Nothing is released until the surrounding environment becomes stable enough to support growth over time, not just briefly. When moisture finally arrives, it does not trigger immediate action. Water enters the seed slowly, softening its outer layers and allowing internal systems to reawaken gradually. There is no single moment where growth begins. Instead, there is a smooth transition from deep rest into gentle activity. Temperature plays a role as well. Warmth does not rush the process, but it allows internal reactions to proceed at a sustainable pace. Cold slows them again if conditions become uncertain. This careful responsiveness protects the future plant from emerging too early when survival would be unlikely. As the seed absorbs water, internal structures begin to expand. The first movement is almost always downward. A small root forms and extends into the soil, guided not by intention, but by gravity and moisture. This root does not explore aggressively. It grows slowly, testing its surroundings, responding to resistance and space. If conditions are dense, it pauses. If they are supportive, it continues. Above the surface, nothing appears to be happening. And that invisibility is important. Most of the critical work of growth happens before anything can be seen. Stability is established first. Support systems form before any upward movement is attempted. Seeds do not rush to become visible. They ensure balance before exposure. As you listen, you do not need to stay alert for these details. The value of this story does not depend on remembering it. Like the seed itself, you are allowed to remain still, supported by quiet conditions, letting change unfold only when it is ready. Once the first root begins to extend, the environment surrounding it becomes just as important as the seed itself. This environment is the soil. Soil is not simply dirt. It is a complex, layered structure made of mineral particles, organic matter, air, and water, arranged in a way that changes very slowly over time. Its most important quality is not richness or perfection, but consistency. For a young plant, soil provides protection before it provides nourishment. It buffers temperature changes, shields delicate structures from sudden shifts, and absorbs excess water while holding enough moisture to sustain growth. Nothing in this environment moves quickly. As the root continues downward, it encounters resistance. This resistance is not an obstacle. It is part of how the plant understands where it can grow safely. Roots do not push through soil by force. They grow by applying steady pressure over long periods, allowing particles to shift gradually around them. If the ground is too compact, growth slows. If it is loose and balanced, growth continues. This responsiveness prevents damage. It ensures that expansion only happens when the surrounding structure can support it. Soil also acts as a memory of previous life. Fragments of older plants, broken down over time, remain mixed into its layers. These materials release nutrients slowly, not all at once, creating a stable supply rather than a sudden surge. Nothing in soil is wasted. Energy and matter are recycled continuously, moving from one form to another without interruption. Below the surface, this slow exchange continues quietly. Roots release small amounts of organic compounds that help loosen minerals. Microorganisms respond, breaking down materials and making them available again. The plant does not control this process, it participates in it. Above the surface, there may still be no visible sign of growth. This delay is intentional in its own way. Plants prioritize stability before exposure. They establish support systems first, ensuring that when upward growth begins, it can be sustained over time. Soil allows this preparation to happen without disturbance. Sound does not reach here. Light does not penetrate. Change arrives gradually. If conditions shift unexpectedly, growth can pause without harm. Roots do not panic. They simply remain in place, waiting for balance to return. This ability to pause is essential. It protects the plant from responding too quickly to short-term changes that would not support long-term survival. As you listen, there is no need to follow these processes closely. The purpose is not understanding every detail, but recognizing the pace at which life often moves when it is not being directed. Like soil, you are allowed to remain steady without action. You do not need to react to every thought or sensation. Support does not require effort. Growth happens best when the environment is calm enough to allow it. As roots settle into the soil, another quiet system begins to shape the pace of growth. This system is water. Water does not arrive all at once, and it does not move quickly through the ground. It enters slowly, guided by gravity and the spaces between soil particles, spreading outward and downward in small, controlled paths. By the time it reaches a root, it has already been filtered, slowed, and stabilized. This gradual movement is essential. Too much water at once would overwhelm delicate structures. Too little would halt growth entirely. The soil's role is to moderate this flow, allowing moisture to remain available without becoming disruptive. Roots do not pull water aggressively. They absorb it as it becomes accessible, responding to differences in concentration rather than force. This process happens continuously, without clear beginnings or endings. Inside the plant, water moves upward through narrow channels, carried by pressure differences created by evaporation at the leaves above. There is no pump. There is no command center. The movement depends entirely on balance and repetition. Along with water come dissolved minerals. These nutrients are not delivered in large amounts. They arrive gradually, carried molecule by molecule, allowing the plant to integrate them without strain. This slow delivery protects internal systems from shock. Water also regulates temperature. It absorbs heat during warmer periods and releases it slowly as conditions cool. This buffering effect keeps internal processes within a narrow, stable range. When rainfall increases, soil absorbs the excess, spreading it across time. When dry periods arrive, stored moisture is released slowly. Roots respond by adjusting their activity, not by accelerating or retreating suddenly. If conditions become too dry, growth pauses. The plant does not attempt to continue at all costs. It waits. This ability to pause is as important as the ability to grow. Responding too quickly to temporary changes would risk long-term stability. Water availability teaches the plant when to proceed and when to remain still. Much of this movement remains invisible. There is no outward sign that water is traveling upward or circulating through tissues. Yet without it, nothing else could continue. The plant does not measure time in hours or days. It measures it through consistency, through the repeated arrival of moisture, through the absence of extremes. As you listen, you do not need to track these processes. The value lies not in remembering them, but in sensing their pace. Water supports growth not by pushing it forward, but by allowing it to continue without interruption. It creates conditions where change can happen slowly enough to be sustainable. In the same way, rest does not force recovery. It allows it. You are not required to move forward quickly. You are allowed to remain where conditions feel stable, letting balance return on its own. As water continues its steady movement through the soil and into the plant, another constant presence shapes growth from above. This presence is light. Light does not arrive as a sudden force. It returns each day along a familiar path, changing gradually in angle, duration, and intensity. These slow variations provide information rather than instruction. Plants do not respond to a single moment of brightness. They respond to patterns, to the length of the day, to the repeated rhythm of light and darkness over time. As light reaches the leaves, energy is captured and converted through processes that occur continuously, not in bursts. This conversion is measured and controlled. Excess energy is dispersed. Deficiency slows activity rather than causing damage. Clouds, shadows, and changing weather soften light naturally. These interruptions are not harmful. They prevent overstimulation and help maintain balance. Light also provides direction. Stems lean gradually toward brighter areas, adjusting their orientation over many hours or days. This movement is so slow, it is rarely noticed in real time. There is no competition in this response. Each plant adjusts according to its immediate surroundings, not in relation to others. Growth remains individualized and stable. When night arrives, activity does not stop abruptly. It slows. Energy is redistributed. Processes that depend on light pause without consequence. Darkness is not a setback. It is a necessary part of the cycle. This alternating rhythm of light and dark allows internal systems to recover and rebalance. Without it, growth would become unstable and inefficient. Seasonal changes in light carry additional information. Shorter days signal preparation and conservation. Longer days allow expansion and reproduction. These transitions happen gradually, giving the plant time to adjust without strain. Light does not force development forward. It sets the conditions under which development becomes possible. This is why growth rarely feels sudden when observed closely. By the time change becomes visible, it has already been supported by countless small adjustments to light over time. As you listen, you do not need to remain attentive to these details. The purpose is not understanding the mechanics, but feeling the pace at which natural systems operate. Light supports life not by intensity, but by reliability, by returning again and again without demand. In the same way, rest does not need to be dramatic to be effective. Consistency matters more than effort. You are allowed to slow with the rhythm of the day, to let awareness dim and return naturally. Nothing needs to be forced forward. Growth continues best when it is given time. With water and light establishing a steady rhythm, the role of roots becomes increasingly important. They are no longer simply anchors. They become regulators, quietly maintaining balance between the plant and its environment. Roots do not spread randomly. Their growth follows gradients of moisture, temperature, and available space. Each extension is measured, responding to conditions rather than ambition. As soil density changes, roots adjust their direction. In compact areas, growth slows. In looser regions, it resumes. This responsiveness protects the plant from damage and conserves energy. Roots also form relationships with the surrounding soil that go beyond physical support. They release small amounts of organic compounds that influence nearby microorganisms. In response, these organisms break down minerals and organic matter, making nutrients available in forms the plant can absorb. This exchange is not controlled by the plant. It emerges naturally from proximity and repetition. Balance develops over time through cooperation rather than command. As the root network expands, stability increases. The plant becomes less sensitive to short-term changes in moisture or temperature. Fluctuations are absorbed rather than transmitted directly upward. This buffering effect is essential. It allows the plant to remain steady even when surface conditions shift unexpectedly. Roots also store resources. Excess nutrients and energy are held below the surface, reserved for periods when growth above slows or pauses. Nothing is wasted. Everything is redistributed when needed. Despite their importance, roots remain unseen. Their work does not announce itself. Above ground, the plant may still appear unchanged, even as its foundation strengthens. This invisibility is not accidental. Nature prioritizes stability before visibility. Support systems are completed before expansion becomes obvious. If conditions deteriorate, roots can reduce activity without harm. Growth pauses. Energy is conserved. The plant waits. This capacity to wait is critical. Responding too quickly to temporary conditions would compromise long-term survival. Roots allow the plant to distinguish between short-term variation and lasting change. As you listen, there is no need to stay engaged with every idea. The value of this moment lies in the pace, not the detail. Roots remind us that strength often develops out of sight, that preparation happens before expression, that stability does not require attention. In the same way, you are not required to be active to be supported. Rest does not mean absence of progress. It means conditions are being restored quietly. Growth will continue when balance allows it. Until then, remaining steady is enough. Once the foundation below the surface has stabilized, upward growth begins to take shape. This stage does not arrive suddenly. It emerges gradually, supported by everything that has already been established. The stem is not designed to rise quickly. Its purpose is not height, but connection. It links what is happening underground with what will soon interact with light and air. Growth at this stage happens by extension rather than force. Cells lengthen slowly, drawing on water and nutrients that have been moving upward steadily for some time. This process does not create visible motion from one moment to the next. Change becomes noticeable only when enough time has passed. The stem adjusts constantly as it grows. It responds to light by leaning slightly in one direction, then correcting itself as conditions change. These movements are subtle, unfolding over hours or days rather than minutes. Strength develops gradually. As the stem lengthens, its internal structure becomes more complex, adding support without sacrificing flexibility. This balance allows it to bend rather than break when exposed to wind or shifting conditions. Wind plays an important role at this stage. It does not oppose growth, it refines it. Gentle movement encourages the stem to strengthen its tissues, preparing it for future exposure. Repeated, mild stress creates resilience rather than damage. At no point does the plant rush this process. If resources become limited, upward growth slows naturally. If conditions improve, it resumes without strain. This responsiveness prevents instability. Rapid expansion without support would place the plant at risk. Controlled growth ensures that each new section can be sustained. While the stem becomes visible above the ground, its progress remains deeply connected to what is happening below. Roots continue adjusting. Water continues moving. Light continues returning. Nothing operates independently. If conditions change suddenly, the plant does not collapse. Growth pauses. Energy is redirected. The system waits until balance is restored. This stage often gives the impression of progress because something can finally be seen. But visibility does not mean acceleration. It simply means that preparation has reached a point where exposure is safe. As you listen, you are not required to track this development. The purpose is not observation, but understanding pace. Growth upward only occurs when support below is sufficient. Nothing is forced ahead of readiness. In the same way, progress in rest does not need to be visible to be real. You are allowed to remain still, knowing that support is present even when nothing appears to be happening. Just as the stem rises slowly when conditions allow, restoration happens quietly. Time, consistency, and balance do the work. Nothing needs to be pushed forward. As the stem stabilizes, the plant begins to expand its surface through the formation of leaves. This stage is not about display. It is about regulation and exchange. Leaves are designed to interact with the environment continuously. They manage light, air, and moisture, adjusting their behavior in response to changing conditions rather than fixed rules. Each leaf unfolds gradually. Its shape develops over time, influenced by light exposure, temperature, and internal balance. There is no single moment when a leaf becomes complete. Once open, leaves begin a constant exchange with the surrounding air. They release moisture, absorb gases, and regulate temperature through processes that operate continuously and quietly. Nothing here is abrupt. Leaves adjust their orientation slowly throughout the day. They respond to light by changing angle, not position. This allows them to capture energy efficiently without exposing themselves to excess. At night, this activity slows. Exchange decreases. Energy is redistributed. The plant enters a quieter state without losing momentum. This daily rhythm of activity and rest is essential. Without periods of reduced activity, internal systems would become unstable. Balance depends on variation. Leaves also play a protective role. They shield internal tissues from excessive light and heat. They buffer changes in temperature and moisture, preventing stress from traveling deeper into the plant. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate. The plant becomes more efficient, more stable, and better suited to its surroundings. No single change is dramatic, but together they create resilience. Leaves are sensitive to long-term conditions rather than short-term fluctuations. They do not react strongly to brief changes in light or temperature. They respond to patterns that persist. This measured response prevents overcorrection. It allows the plant to maintain consistency even when the environment varies. While leaves are visible and often noticed, their work remains mostly unseen. There is no signal that exchange is happening, no outward sign of regulation. As you listen, you do not need to remain engaged with every detail. The purpose is not understanding mechanics, but recognizing rhythm. Leaves demonstrate how stability is maintained through constant, small adjustments rather than dramatic shifts. They show how systems remain balanced by responding gradually, not urgently. In the same way, rest does not require sudden change. It happens through small, steady adjustments in awareness and breath. You are allowed to soften without disappearing, to remain present without effort. Just as leaves regulate the plant quietly, rest can regulate you without demanding attention. As leaves continue their quiet exchange with light and air, time becomes the dominant force, shaping everything that follows. In natural systems, time does not act as a deadline. It acts as a stabilizer. Growth inside a garden, a field, or an open landscape does not happen in isolated moments. It accumulates gradually through repetition rather than speed. Small changes layer themselves so slowly that they often go unnoticed until they have already become established. Days pass without marking themselves. Light returns each morning at a slightly different angle. Evenings soften into night without interruption. Nothing signals urgency. Plants do not measure progress in short intervals. They respond to consistency over long periods. What matters is not how much happens in a single day, but how reliably conditions repeat. Within this rhythm, growth continues quietly. Leaves adjust, stems strengthen, roots deepen or pause as needed. Each response is measured, never excessive. Seasonal changes enter gradually. Temperature shifts do not arrive all at once. Light lingers longer or fades earlier by small amounts each day. These subtle transitions give plants time to adjust without stress. There is no sharp boundary between one season and the next. Preparation overlaps with change. Rest and activity exist side by side for long periods. This overlap is essential. Sudden transitions would disrupt internal balance. Gradual change allows systems to adapt without damage. Time also allows errors to correct themselves. If growth leans too far in one direction, adjustment follows. If resources are temporarily limited, activity slows rather than collapses. Nothing in this process depends on constant attention. Plants continue whether conditions are observed or ignored. They rely on repetition, not supervision. This is why natural growth rarely feels dramatic. It becomes visible only after enough time has passed for accumulation to matter. As you listen, you are not required to track this passage of time. The story does not need to be followed closely. It is designed to move at the same pace it describes. Time does not rush the system forward. It allows stability to emerge naturally. In the same way, rest does not demand progress. It allows recovery to unfold without pressure. You do not need to notice each moment of change. You are allowed to drift while time continues to work quietly in the background. Just as plants rely on steady repetition rather than urgency, restoration happens when space is given for it to occur. Nothing needs to be completed. Nothing needs to be hurried. Time is already doing the work. As time continues its quiet work, growth begins to concentrate rather than expand. Along the stem, small structures start to form. These are buds. Buds are not incomplete flowers. They are protective stages, designed to hold complexity in a compact and stable form until conditions are suitable for exposure. Nothing about them is rushed. A bud forms gradually as internal systems reorganize. Petals, reproductive structures, and support tissues develop slowly inside layers that shield them from sudden changes in temperature, moisture, and light. From the outside, very little appears to be happening. This lack of visible change is intentional. Buds exist to delay visibility until stability is assured. Unlike leaves and stems, buds are sensitive to long-term patterns rather than immediate conditions. A warm afternoon does not cause them to open. A single cold night does not stop their development. They respond only to trends that persist. This sensitivity protects the plant from false signals. Opening too early would expose delicate structures to conditions they cannot yet tolerate. Waiting preserves balance. Inside the bud, growth continues at a measured pace. Cells divide, tissues differentiate. Color and structure begin to form long before they are seen. Nothing in this process requires precision timing. There is no fixed schedule. The bud does not count days or measure progress. Instead, it responds to cumulative signals: lengthening daylight, consistent temperatures, reliable access to water and nutrients. When these signals align, resistance decreases gradually. Protective layers soften. Internal pressure shifts. Still, nothing happens all at once. This gradual readiness is one of the most important features of flowering plants. It allows them to synchronize exposure with conditions that are likely to remain favorable for more than a brief moment. Buds are patient because patience increases survival. From the outside, a bud may remain unchanged for long periods. This can create the impression of stillness. But internally, preparation continues. As you listen, there is no need to imagine the details clearly. The value of this moment lies in understanding pace, not process. Buds demonstrate a principle that appears throughout natural systems. Visibility is delayed until support is sufficient. Nothing important is revealed before it can be sustained. In the same way, Rest does not require immediate release or transformation. It allows internal systems to settle first. Recovery happens beneath the surface before it becomes noticeable. You are not required to open, respond, or change. Remaining closed to stimulation for a while is not resistance. It is preparation. Just as a bud holds complexity quietly until the right moment arrives, you are allowed to remain protected, supported, and unhurried. Readiness will come on its own time. As the internal preparations within the bud continue, the moment when a flower begins to open does not arrive as a sudden event, nor does it announce itself in any obvious way, because flowering is not a reaction to a single signal, but the result of many stable conditions aligning over time. The outer layers of the bud gradually lose their rigidity as internal pressure shifts, allowing the petals inside to ease outward slowly, responding to light, temperature, and moisture in a way that remains measured and controlled. This opening is rarely visible in real time because each movement is small and spread across hours or even days, making the transition feel subtle rather than dramatic, as though the flower has always been partly open and only later becomes noticeable. What appears to be a moment of change is, in reality, the continuation of processes that began long before anything could be seen. As petals unfold, their shape stabilizes naturally, guided by internal structures that formed quietly while the flower was still protected, allowing balance to emerge without correction or adjustment. Color, which often draws attention once the flower is fully open, does not arrive suddenly either, but becomes apparent gradually as light interacts with surfaces that were already prepared to receive it. During this stage, the flower does not attempt to extend its presence or attract attention. It simply exists in equilibrium with its surroundings, remaining open as long as conditions remain supportive and stable. Air moves around the petals without resistance, light touches them without demand, and internal processes continue at a pace that does not accelerate simply because visibility has increased. There is no urgency associated with being open, just as there was no urgency during preparation, because flowering is not a final goal, but a temporary state within a larger cycle that will continue regardless of observation. If conditions shift unexpectedly, the flower does not react abruptly, but instead maintains balance for as long as possible, drawing on the stability that was established earlier. This stage often feels significant to those who notice it, yet for the plant itself, it represents neither a climax nor a conclusion, only a phase that will eventually give way to another without resistance or loss. Nothing about the opening demands attention, and nothing is lost if it goes unseen. As you listen, there is no need to remain alert or focused on these details, because the purpose of this moment is not understanding, but alignment with a slower pace, one that allows change to happen without interruption. Just as a flower opens when conditions allow and remains open without effort, rest can arrive in the same way, settling naturally when the environment feels stable enough to support it. Once the flower has opened and settled into its surroundings, color becomes more noticeable, not because it has suddenly appeared, but because the structures that interact with light are now exposed and stable enough to reflect it consistently over time. What we perceive as color is not an addition or an ornament, but the result of light interacting with surfaces that have been shaped slowly through internal processes that occurred long before the petals were visible. As daylight moves across the flower, color shifts subtly without the flower itself changing, deepening in softer light and appearing lighter when brightness increases, creating the impression of variation, even though the underlying structure remains the same. Cloud cover, angle of the sun, and surrounding shadows all influence how color is perceived, meaning that what is seen at any moment is as much a product of the environment as it is of the flower itself. This variability is not a flaw, but a feature, allowing the flower to remain visually stable without needing to maintain a fixed appearance, because flexibility rather than precision supports balance in natural systems. The pigments within the petals absorb certain wavelengths and reflect others in a way that does not require energy beyond what is already being maintained, allowing color to exist without creating strain on the plant. Over time, as the flower remains open, these pigments begin to change gradually, not through sudden loss, but through slow chemical shifts that soften intensity and reduce contrast, signaling that the flower is moving naturally towards the next phase of its cycle. This fading does not indicate damage or failure, but a redistribution of resources as the plant prepares to direct energy elsewhere. Nothing in this transition happens abruptly, because abrupt change would disrupt internal balance, and balance remains the priority even after visibility has increased. The petals do not resist this softening, nor do they attempt to maintain brightness beyond what conditions allow, because persistence in natural systems depends on responsiveness rather than control. What often feels like beauty to an observer is, for the plant, simply equilibrium maintained over time, with color acting as a byproduct of structure rather than a purpose in itself. When the flower eventually begins to lose definition, the process is quiet enough that it may go unnoticed unless one is watching closely, reinforcing the idea that change does not need attention in order to occur correctly. As you listen, there is no need to form a clear image of these changes, because the value of this moment lies in sensing the pace at which transformation happens when it is not being forced or accelerated. Just as color appears, shifts, and softens without effort, awareness can do the same, gradually fading from sharp focus into rest without requiring intention. Nothing here needs to be held in place, and nothing needs to be preserved longer than conditions allow, because stability does not depend on permanence. Like the flower itself, you are allowed to remain present only as long as it feels supportive, letting intensity soften naturally as balance returns. As the flower remains open and color begins to soften, the larger cycle that has been unfolding quietly from the beginning continues without interruption, because flowering was never meant to be a permanent state, only a temporary balance between growth and release. There is no clear moment when this phase ends, just as there was no single moment when it began, since change in natural systems rarely follows sharp boundaries. Gradually, the structures that once held the petals open begin to relax, allowing gravity, air movement, and time to influence their position, until petals no longer hold themselves outward with the same tension, and instead begin to return toward the ground. This movement is slow enough to escape notice, occurring in small adjustments rather than visible falls, so that what looks like stillness is often motion stretched across time. When petals finally detach, They do not fall as a loss, but as a continuation, settling into the soil where their material becomes part of the same environment that once supported the seed from which the plant grew. Nothing is discarded in this process because natural cycles are designed to reuse structure rather than eliminate it, returning matter gently to the system without disruption. While this occurs, the plant itself does not stop functioning or collapse into inactivity, but instead shifts its internal priorities, redirecting energy toward the formation and stabilization of seeds that will carry the cycle forward. This transition happens quietly, without requiring visibility, and without signaling completion, because continuation matters more than closure. The fading of the flower does not represent an ending, but a redistribution, with nutrients and energy moving away from exposed structures and back into protected ones, where they can be preserved more efficiently. Even as visible features soften and disappear, internal processes remain active, maintaining balance until the next phase is ready to begin. What often feels like disappearance is simply movement into a different state, one that is less visible but no less significant, reinforcing the idea that presence does not need to be constant in order to be meaningful. Natural systems prioritize sustainability over display, allowing elements to retreat when exposure is no longer beneficial. As you listen, there is no need to follow each transition closely, because this part of the cycle is defined more by pace than by detail, and by the absence of urgency rather than by action. The slow return of material to the soil happens whether it is observed or not, guided by gravity, time, and balance rather than intention. In the same way, rest does not require a dramatic shift or a clear endpoint, because recovery often arrives through gradual release rather than sudden change. Just as petals loosen and return when their role is complete, you are allowed to let effort soften and fade without needing to mark the moment it happens. Nothing here is lost, and nothing needs to be held in place longer than conditions allow. The cycle continues quietly, carrying everything forward in a form that supports what comes next. As cycles repeat and materials return to the ground, flowers do not remain confined to a single location or moment, because over long periods of time, their presence spreads gradually across landscapes through processes that are slow, indirect, and largely unnoticed. Seeds do not travel with urgency or intention, but move quietly through wind, water, and the movement of animals, settling wherever conditions allow rather than where distance is maximized. Most seeds fall close to where they formed, resting in familiar soil and waiting for conditions to repeat, while others move slightly farther, carried in small increments rather than long leaps, so that change accumulates through repetition instead of speed. This slow dispersal ensures that growth remains connected to environments that have already proven supportive, reducing risk rather than seeking expansion. Over years and seasons, these small movements begin to shape open spaces as single plants give rise to clusters, and clusters gradually fill fields, slopes, and edges without abrupt transformation. Nothing about this process disrupts what is already present, because flowers do not replace existing life, but integrate alongside grasses, shrubs, and trees, adjusting quietly to available space. Landscapes change in this way without announcing themselves, and familiarity builds slowly as the same growth returns again and again, creating patterns that feel stable rather than new. The ground remembers where seeds have settled before, holding traces of previous cycles that make future growth more likely to return to the same places. Seasonal repetition reinforces this continuity as flowers emerge, fade, and reappear in predictable rhythms that do not require supervision or intervention. What looks like stillness between seasons is simply pause, not absence, with seeds remaining present and prepared beneath the surface. These patterns of spread do not rely on control or planning, but on patience, because natural systems favor persistence over rapid expansion. By moving slowly, flowers avoid exhausting the environments that support them, allowing balance to remain intact over time. Even when conditions change, this gradual spread provides resilience because growth is distributed rather than concentrated, reducing the impact of disruption in any single place. Stability emerges not from strength, but from repetition across time and space. As you listen, there is no need to imagine vast landscapes or trace movement precisely, because the purpose of this moment is not visualization, but awareness of pace. The idea that presence can expand gently, without urgency, is enough. Just as flowers spread across open ground through countless small movements rather than dramatic shifts, calm can spread within you in the same way, settling gradually rather than arriving all at once. Nothing needs to be forced outward, and nothing needs to move faster than conditions allow. Balance establishes itself through time, repetition, and quiet continuation. And once it does, it remains steady without effort. As flowers continue to return to the same spaces over time, their presence begins to influence the character of those environments in ways that do not rely on intention or design, because living systems shape their surroundings simply by existing within them. Paths bordered by growth feel softer not because they were planned that way, but because repeated cycles of plants opening, fading, and returning gradually reduce contrast and introduce continuity. Flowers do not arrange themselves to create comfort. Yet the environments they inhabit often feel calmer as a result, since their growth alters airflow, temperature, and visual rhythm in subtle ways that accumulate over time. Air moves more slowly near dense growth. Temperature changes are moderated, and sharp edges in open spaces become less pronounced as repetition replaces emptiness. These effects are not immediate, and they do not depend on attention, because flowers influence space through consistency rather than impact, shaping environments gradually enough that change feels natural rather than imposed. What emerges is not decoration, but balance, created by the steady presence of living systems responding to conditions instead of controlling them. As seasons repeat, places where flowers return develop a recognizable rhythm, one that does not need explanation because it is felt rather than observed. Growth resumes, fades, and resumes again, reinforcing stability through familiarity rather than novelty. Even when flowers are not visible, their influence remains, as roots, seeds, and altered soil structure continue to affect how the environment responds to moisture, heat, and movement. Nothing is truly absent between cycles. It is simply less apparent. These spaces do not belong to flowers alone, nor do flowers dominate them, because coexistence rather than ownership defines how natural systems persist over time. Other plants, insects, and animals adjust in response, forming layered relationships that remain flexible rather than fixed. Change within these environments does not arrive suddenly, because abrupt shifts would disrupt balance, So adaptation occurs through small adjustments that spread across many cycles. This allows stability to persist even as conditions slowly evolve. As you listen, there is no need to picture a specific place or imagine detailed scenes, because the purpose of this moment is not visualization, but alignment with a slower rhythm of influence. The idea that presence alone can shape space without effort or intention is enough. In the same way, rest does not need to be actively created or managed in order to be effective. By simply remaining present within a calm environment, the body begins to adjust, softening responses and reducing tension over time. Just as flowers shape their surroundings by returning again and again without force, rest shapes your inner environment gradually through consistency rather than action. Nothing needs to be rearranged or corrected. Balance emerges quietly, and once it does, it holds. As flowers continue to return to the same environments year after year, something deeper than seasonal repetition begins to emerge, because living systems do not exist only in moments, but across long spans of time that extend far beyond what is immediately visible. What appears to be a single cycle of growth is, in reality, part of a much longer continuity that links one generation to the next without interruption. Plants do not preserve memory in the way humans do, yet they carry continuity through structure, chemistry, and repetition, passing forward the same quiet patterns that have proven stable across countless cycles. Seeds form, rest, and grow again, guided by conditions rather than intention, allowing the same processes to unfold reliably, even as surroundings change gradually. Over decades and centuries, flowers return to the same ground, often following paths established long before any individual plant existed, because soil retains the traces of previous life in ways that favor familiar growth. Materials left behind by earlier plants alter structure, nutrient availability, and moisture retention, subtly shaping what is able to return. This continuity does not require preservation or protection. It persists because repetition itself creates stability, reinforcing patterns that work while allowing others to fade quietly without resistance. Generations overlap without awareness of one another, yet remain connected through shared conditions and shared responses, forming a chain of growth that does not depend on memory or recognition. Nothing needs to be remembered for the pattern to continue. Even when surface conditions shift, deeper systems adapt slowly rather than abruptly, ensuring that long-term balance is maintained despite short-term variation. Change spreads gradually across generations, allowing adjustment without collapse. This persistence explains why familiar landscapes can feel unchanged even as individual plants come and go, because what remains constant is not the organism, but the process itself. The rhythm outlasts the participants. As you listen, there is no need to imagine long histories or distant time frames in detail, because the value of this moment lies in sensing continuity rather than measuring it. The idea that stability can exist without awareness is enough. Natural systems do not rush to replace what has passed. They allow space for transition, letting one form give way to another without disruption or urgency. This patience is what makes persistence possible. In the same way, rest does not require immediate results in order to be effective. Recovery unfolds across time, not moments, and continues even when it is not consciously noticed. Just as flowers persist across generations through quiet repetition rather than force, balance within, you can return through steady, uninterrupted rest. Nothing needs to be held in mind. Nothing needs to be maintained. Time carries the process forward on its own. As continuity stretches across generations and patterns repeat without interruption, flowers become part of something larger than individual cycles, because their presence slowly integrates into the broader systems that shape landscapes over long periods of time. Fields, meadows, and quiet open spaces do not remain empty by chance, but are gradually structured by repeated growth that settles into familiar rhythms and reinforces balance through consistency rather than expansion. Over time, flowers influence how water moves across the land, how soil holds moisture, and how air circulates close to the ground, creating conditions that favor steadiness instead of extremes. These changes occur gradually enough that they are rarely noticed, yet they alter the environment in lasting ways that support continued growth without disruption. As roots return to the same areas year after year, soil becomes more structured, less prone to erosion, and more capable of sustaining life during periods of change. This stability does not result from strength or resistance, but from accumulation, as countless small interactions layer themselves across time. Flowers also contribute to the quiet networks that support other forms of life, not by dominating space, but by sharing it, allowing insects, microorganisms, and surrounding plants to adapt alongside them without competition or displacement. This coexistence creates resilience because systems that are shared rather than concentrated recover more easily when conditions shift. Nothing in this process requires visibility. Even when flowers are absent above the surface, their influence continues through altered soil chemistry, stored nutrients, and prepared ground that remains receptive to future growth. Presence persists even when appearance fades. These environments do not rely on constant renewal or novelty to remain balanced, because repetition itself creates familiarity, and familiarity reduces instability. What returns again and again becomes reliable, not through permanence, but through recurrence. As you listen, there is no need to imagine these environments clearly or follow the connections precisely, because the value lies in sensing how stability develops when systems are allowed to repeat without interruption. The idea that balance can be built slowly, without direction or urgency, is enough. In the same way, rest does not need to be refreshed constantly to remain effective. Once calm has settled, it can continue quietly beneath awareness, supporting recovery even as attention drifts. Just as flowers shape the land through steady presence rather than effort, rest shapes the body and mind through continuity rather than control. Nothing needs to be managed or improved. Balance holds itself when given time. As landscapes gradually settle into the rhythms shaped by repeated cycles of growth, flowers begin to feel less like individual presences and more like part of the background structure of the environment. Because familiarity emerges when change happens slowly enough to blend into continuity. What once may have appeared distinct or noticeable becomes woven into the setting, contributing to a sense of steadiness that does not demand attention. This integration does not erase variation, but softens it, allowing differences in color, shape, and timing to exist without creating disruption, since repetition reduces contrast and encourages balance. The environment becomes predictable, not because it is static, but because its changes follow patterns that remain consistent over long periods of time. Even as individual flowers appear and fade, the overall character of the space remains stable, supported by the ongoing presence of seeds, roots, and altered soil that carry forward the conditions required for renewal. Nothing needs to be rebuilt each season because preparation already exists beneath the surface. This quiet continuity allows life to proceed without urgency, as systems respond to long-term conditions rather than immediate fluctuations, ensuring that temporary changes do not overwhelm deeper balance. Extreme shifts are absorbed gradually, spreading their impact across time rather than concentrating it in a single moment. As a result, the environment develops resilience that is not visible but felt, expressed through steadiness rather than strength, and through recovery rather than resistance. Balance is maintained not by preventing change, but by allowing it to unfold slowly. These processes operate independently of observation, continuing whether they are noticed or ignored, because stability in natural systems does not rely on awareness. It depends on repetition and time. As you listen, there is no need to remain engaged with the details of this continuity, because the effect does not come from understanding, but from exposure to the rhythm itself. The pace of the narration mirrors the pace of the process it describes, allowing the mind to align naturally without effort. In the same way that landscapes become calm through familiarity rather than control, rest develops when attention is allowed to soften without direction. There is no requirement to monitor progress or maintain focus. Just as flowers become part of their environment through quiet repetition, calm can become part of your internal state through steady presence rather than deliberate action. Nothing needs to be completed or achieved. The system continues on its own, carrying balance forward gently, moment by moment, without asking for participation. As balance becomes established through familiarity and repetition, the presence of flowers begins to influence perception itself, because environments shaped by slow, predictable change tend to feel calmer even when nothing actively draws attention. This sense of calm does not arise from stillness, but from the absence of surprise, as systems that move gradually allow the mind to relax without needing to remain alert. When change unfolds at a measured pace, there is no need to anticipate disruption, and the environment becomes easier to inhabit simply because it does not demand constant adjustment. Flowers contribute to this effect, not through any single action, but through their consistent return, reinforcing patterns that feel reliable rather than new. Over time, the repetition of growth and rest creates a background rhythm that blends into daily experience, shaping how space is felt rather than how it looks. Movement becomes softer, transitions become smoother, and contrast between states decreases, allowing continuity to replace tension. This reduction in contrast does not remove variation, but places it within a range that remains manageable, so that differences in season, light, and temperature do not register as interruptions, but as gentle shifts within an expected cycle. Stability emerges not because change has stopped, but because it has become predictable. The body responds naturally to environments like this, adjusting posture, breath, and awareness without conscious effort, because systems that do not demand vigilance allow internal regulation to return on its own. Nothing needs to be corrected or improved for this response to occur. Even when attention drifts, the effect remains, as calm environments continue to support balance, whether they are actively noticed or not. Presence is maintained through consistency rather than focus. As you listen, there is no requirement to follow the narration closely, because the rhythm itself is enough to guide the experience. Understanding is optional. Awareness can soften without losing stability. In the same way that flowers shape perception by returning again and again without urgency, rest shapes the nervous system through repetition rather than intensity. The body does not need instruction to settle. It responds naturally when conditions feel predictable. Just as landscapes become easier to inhabit when change slows, the mind becomes easier to rest within when stimulation decreases gradually. Nothing needs to be forced away. Balance develops quietly, sustained by the same principles that allow natural systems to persist over time, carrying calm forward without effort or intention. As calm becomes established through repetition and predictability, the distinction between environment and experience begins to soften, because spaces shaped by slow, consistent change tend to influence the way time itself is perceived. Moments no longer feel sharply separated from one another, and attention is no longer pulled forward or backward, allowing awareness to rest naturally in what is already present. In environments where growth follows familiar rhythms, there is no pressure to respond quickly, because nothing arrives unexpectedly or demands immediate adjustment. Flowers contribute to this continuity by returning in patterns that are steady rather than dramatic, reinforcing a sense of flow that does not require effort to maintain. Over time, this continuity affects how the body relates to its surroundings. As breathing deepens slightly, muscles release tension gradually, and internal systems synchronize with external rhythms without conscious direction. This response does not depend on understanding or intention, but on exposure to stability over time. The repetition of cycles reduces the need for vigilance, because when conditions are reliable, the body does not prepare for disruption. Instead, it shifts toward conservation and restoration, allowing energy to be redistributed quietly rather than held in readiness. This shift happens slowly enough that it often goes unnoticed, unfolding beneath awareness as systems settle into equilibrium. Nothing signals that balance has been reached, because balance does not announce itself. Even when attention wanders or fades, the effect remains, as continuity does not depend on presence of mind. It depends on absence of urgency. As you listen, there is no expectation to remain engaged with the narration, because the purpose of this moment is not focus, but ease. Thoughts can drift without consequence, and awareness can narrow or widen without effort. Just as flowers influence the sense of time by returning at a steady pace, rest influences perception by slowing internal rhythms until urgency dissolves on its own. There is no need to arrive anywhere, and no need to hold on to the experience. Time continues forward gently, carrying everything with it in a way that does not require participation. Nothing needs to be completed or resolved. Stability remains present simply because conditions allow it to remain. As the cycle continues without needing to be observed, the presence of flowers fades naturally back into the larger system from which it emerged, not as a disappearance, but as a quiet return to balance that does not mark an ending or demand resolution. Nothing in nature concludes with finality, because completion is simply a transition into another state where activity becomes less visible but no less real. What remains after growth, color, and form have softened is not absence, but continuity, carried forward through soil, air, and time in ways that do not require renewal or recognition. The system holds itself together through repetition and stability rather than memory, allowing everything to continue without interruption. This persistence does not rely on effort, because effort would introduce tension where balance already exists. Instead, the cycle maintains itself by allowing each phase to pass when its conditions are no longer present, making space for what comes next without resistance. As seasons move forward, seeds rest quietly beneath the surface, prepared without urgency, held by the same environment that has supported countless cycles before them. Nothing needs to be added, and nothing needs to be preserved beyond its natural moment. The landscape remains steady not because it resists change, but because it accepts it slowly, letting transitions stretch across time until they feel seamless rather than disruptive. What continues is not any single form, but the rhythm itself. As you listen, there is no need to remain awake or attentive, because this final moment does not introduce anything new. It simply allows the pace to settle completely, leaving nothing unfinished and nothing expected. In the same way, rest does not need a conclusion. Sleep does not require permission to arrive. Awareness can soften until it is no longer distinct, carried gently by the same continuity that sustains natural systems without direction or demand. Nothing more needs to happen. Nothing needs to be remembered. The cycle continues quietly, and you are free to rest within it.